Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. I'm delighted to welcome back my co-host to the podcast. We've had some really good feedback from our previous episode, which we weren't sure how it was going to go down. The viewing figures are up, Jordan, and we've got some good feedback, so I had to get you back on. People like obviously hearing us. They like hearing us talk crap, basically. So welcome back.
No, good to be back. Yeah, good to be back. I'm glad I've not been given the boot yet.
We've basically spent the last 30 minutes trying to get a name for this section of the podcast. So just to update everyone, we are going to be continuing with the weekly episodes with guests, but we are going to do some of these episodes between Jordan and I where we maybe pick a few topics, we reflect on things that have gone on recently, maybe even certain podcasts that we've done recently, or conferences like we're going to get into in a second that we've been to, or courses we've been on, or the rest of it. So that is the plan going forward. We are going to post over on socials. We've just come up with some cracking names for this section of the podcast. If you're listening to this episode, go on to the Twitter, go on to probably the Twitter or LinkedIn, and let us know what you think, because we've got some good names already, but I'm pretty sure the listeners could come up with something even better. So go and let us know what you think. We'll release them very soon. We'll release them soon. Well, Jordan, let's kick things off. We obviously met up last week and in Manchester for the Training Ground Guru conference. I did both days at the event, and then you obviously joined me on the Tuesday. So we're just going to have a little chat on what we took away from it, some of the things we've spoke about already, and then probably some things that we haven't. So what was some of the initial reflections from yourself on that 5-hour drive back to Bournemouth?
Yeah, lots of time in the car to reflect. I think overall it was a cracking event. I think the good thing with this industry is you do go to a lot of events and network and conference, but it was a really good event. Some excellent speakers, and what I liked about it as well was it was from all walks of life. So you had coaches there, analysts there, sports scientists, physios, academy directors, you name it, you kind of had it all there, which is quite nice because, if you spend time at a BASIS conference or the UKSCA and football conference or the UKSCA, we're all similar people in the same room. So, yeah, it was nice to just kind of bounce ideas off people and see people from slightly different walk of life and get their views on things. So that was really good. And I thought the speakers were really good. The talks were really good. Some of the presentations were really good as well. But I think what was cool was the fact that, you essentially closed the whole conference down at the end with the roundtable discussion with, three absolute, behemoths of the industry. So, from where Football Fitness Federation started, I think it was pretty cool you must have felt it as well, to see that, you've got Dave Carolan, Tony Strudwick and Tom Little on a roundtable discussion talking about kind of the future athlete and what the future of sports science and sports performance looks like, given the fact that they've kind of seen the evolution of it over the last 20 plus years. So that was really cool to see. And I came away really enthused that Football Fitness Federation's got, a big say in what we're trying to do and how we're trying to help the industry out. And actually the fact that it goes wider than maybe just, physical performance and football fitness, Training Ground Guru, which are, they're a massive company in themselves and are looking at everything which goes into football clubs. And we're friends with Training Ground Guru. We've spoken to many times, but the fact that they're, trying to branch out and reach out to us guys, and you being on stage with them, I think is really cool, because it just shows that there is a want and there is a need for people to find out a bit more in-depth stuff in terms of performance support and everything that those guys were talking about on stage. And I thought you did a really good job. So, and there's some of the stuff they shared, again, it was really insightful, as it always is with those three when they get together. So, yeah, a good. Like you said, I was only there on Tuesday, but I took loads from it, and definitely worth the long trip up.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was really interesting. I think the first day was the interesting side of it was hearing from practitioners or people in completely different roles. So one of the interesting ones earlier on day one was it was like a round table with the directors of football, and Dan Ashworth was one of them. And I thought that was really interesting, talking about, we spoke about this a lot with practitioners going into new roles at different clubs. and the approach they take, whether you're going sort of gung-ho and try and change everything, whether you stand back and watch for a certain number of weeks and then start trying like gradually just make changes and put your spin on things. And that's kind of what he spoke about. He's obviously had very different jobs recently at different establishments in terms of the FA, Newcastle, Brighton. And I thought it was really interesting to hear his take on that. There isn't one way. There isn't like a blueprint of this is what you do when you go into a role. And I think we can apply that as coaches as well. And even working with players, there isn't one way. It's sort of finding out what the temperature is. It's getting the feel of what's going on, the culture and everything that goes into that. Because obviously culture is a word that's so used a lot, isn't it? But what it actually breaks down to, you've got to get the feel of what's going on. And I thought he did that brilliantly. And yeah, that was one that really impressed me on that first day. And then I think the other one that was really interesting was the presentation from Red Bull.
Yeah.
And obviously completely different sport, very, very data driven. And the complex nature of that data was summarized brilliantly in that presentation, because I think it's Nick, his name, and he presented on if you were to simply look on how to win a race with taking away all sort of context. He did a sort of a graph on this is what you do, this is how many times you'd stop or how many times you'd pit, and then that would lead to success. And then he applied context onto that on another graph. And obviously it just went, there was just stuff everywhere. And that's essentially what we were dealing with, isn't it? We were dealing with very context driven scenarios that we've got to adapt to. And again, even though it's a very, very different sport, there was a lot of crossovers and takeaways on what we need to do as practitioners to lead to some sort of success with players.
Yeah. And I think you spot on, because when we were speaking as we were walking to the event, and your reflections on how, you know, data driven, a lot of the presentations were very data heavy and speaking about AI and stuff like that. And we're almost skeptical is not the right word, because we can all accept that AI is going to have a big part to play in things, because it's going to streamline processes. We know that data is a huge part of sports and performance. Again, we know that, you know, and the three guys you were doing the roundtable discussion with, they'll tell you that, and how data's evolved over the last decade or two. But you can never account for the context. You know, you can get all the hydration scores, wellness scores, you know, counter movement jump scores in the morning. You could even do like, you know, whatever you want to do. But if a player comes in and they've got a newborn who was crying all night, you know, you could have applied everything you want, but the context is going to change things. And, you know, there's always things, because of human beings at the end of the day, we're not robots. And I know AI and I know data science is a massive part of the sports now, not just football. Let's go wider than that as well. But we are guilty sometimes of seeing the flashing lights and going, oh, look, new software, new this, new that, the other. And at the end of the day, it's really good to apply some of that stuff if it helps inform practice. But you've just got to remember, you essentially got 11 players running around a football pitch, chasing a bag of wind, trying to kick it into a net. You know, so it has got to be kept in mind. And I liked the fact that the second day seemed to tie a lot of that data stuff in when they were talking about academies and experiences of developing and learning to lose and learning to fail and growing as a person. Because then he kind of got both sides. It was really like human development on the second day, and from the sounds of it, really kind of data driven on the first day, and what the industry can change towards, and just sport and performance in general. So yeah, interesting. Lots of thought-provoking stuff, that's for sure. That's for sure.
I think you're right in that the relationships, again, a topic we've covered again and again and again. You heard it mentioned loads of times in that as well, especially with academy players, but it's 100% applicable for first-team players as well. That, yes, we can be informed by data, whatever that data is, but essentially it's human being interacting with human being. And you see it, don't you, with a lot of professionals talking, probably more so when they retire, on the importance of relationships throughout their careers. I know as a big Man United fan, Liverpool fan, you know what's the David Beckham documentary, and he obviously speaks about Fergie, he speaks about some of the influences earlier on in his career. If that was just purely data driven, and you remove all that, like how much of an impact would that have had?
Yeah.
Like it's massive, I think. And that's what was underlined by the likes of Per Mertesacker, by Nick Cox at Man United. They were constantly talking about creating environments for players to, well, not players, for humans, for kids to thrive and develop. And I think that was the important bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing, like you say, that we've got to keep in mind that these are human beings, young kids with hopes and dreams. And I think, I took a lot from some of the stuff, certainly talk about the academies, because the majority of my background is in the academy, so I've got a big interest in it. But yeah, Nick Cox spoke really well, and I liked what he said in terms of so he's academy director at Man United, for those who don't know, and he spoke about his background. And I came from Watford, Sheffield United, and then moved across to United. And I thought he spoke, and it's just a point you said earlier, that each club was very, very different. And he spoke about the demographic of being at Watford and a nice area to live, leafy green kind of Hertfordshire area. Sheffield United, very inner city Sheffield, football mad city, rivalry with Wednesday, and it was, you had to win, there was real pressure on and all that sort of stuff. And then you go up to Manchester, which I really like the fact he was speaking about. Man United are a global brand, as he said, and we all know who they are. But bigger than the football, there's opportunities and experiences for kids who wouldn't ever really receive that if they weren't in the academy. I used to live in Manchester. I know anyone who's been or lived in Manchester know there's the big areas of poverty in Manchester, and that's what Nick was speaking about. And there's kids coming from neighbourhoods who've got very little opportunity, very talented footballers, and get into Man United academy, and they're going on a plane for the first time on a pre-season tour or an end of season tour, trying foods that they wouldn't usually try in canteens, or getting nutrition lessons where the reality is their parents might not be able to afford some of that food that they're talking about. And the experience is bigger than the football. I really like that. I really buy into that. And I think it's, what Nick kind of finished his presentation on was really powerful, where he said we need to actually champion youth developers and what we are doing as academies, because it's too often you do see it. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine that majority of practitioners will come in and they will want to come in at the starting roles. They're always starting roles in an academy, work up, get to a first team level and stay at first team level. It's the typical trajectory of people's career, and there's not enough emphasis on having proper youth developers in academies. And again, that part of the blame is on clubs, because salaries and work-life balance and things for foundation phase roles, youth development phase roles are typically really hard. A lot of evening works, a lot of 12-hour days, whereas a first team scenario, money's much better. Sometimes you can be done by 3:30, 4 o'clock, those. So the glitz and glam is obviously the first team, but there's not enough, in my opinion, and clearly what Nick was saying, that there's not enough people who are championing proper youth developers who see young people and want to change them into really outstanding young adults, and hopefully into full adults as well. So that was really good to see. And then that was then followed on by Jonathan, wasn't it? And Jonathan and Per Mertesacker, academy manager at Wolves and academy manager at Arsenal, respectively. So speaking of academies, like they kind of followed it on and said that we're trying to give experiences as well as create footballers. And I liked that, because it was typically if you've got big clubs like Wolves and Arsenal and you've got their academy managers on stage, people want to know what's the secret, how are you getting players through, you're producing these amazing players, how are you getting them through? But there was very little emphasis on the players and how we're trying to get them through and how we're trying to develop them to be a first team standard. It was more about what experiences we're trying to give them. We're trying to ship players out on loan. We need to tweak the games program at Premier League 2 level to get them playing men's football, or to get them playing men's teams. And and it became more of the holistic approach, and that was refreshing to hear, because anyone working in an academy will know it's full on. They just got the blinkers on sometimes. It's like, we need to get him through. Scholarship decisions coming up, pro deal decisions are coming up. is he going to get a scholar, or is he injured, or is that going to affect it? And it's just those constant, merry-go-round of decisions and things, really. So just to see that holistic picture was really, really refreshing. I don't know, did you feel the same? Do you think they were talking that way?
100%. And I think anyone that's worked with academy players, that has to be where your passion lies, isn't it? Like, I think the thing that I just wanted to pick up on what you mentioned before about what Nick Cox was talking about the identities of different clubs. And they can all be very different, but they need to be celebrated in a way. And I think you get caught, and I've been guilty of this before, where you'll be at a club and you'll be like, well, this club does it that way. And you'll try and apply it to yours. And there's definitely lessons to be taken from different environments and different clubs. But I think some of the things that I took from him was that let's celebrate what we've got. And really this identity that we've got, and again, that word, this culture that we've got, let's build this. And then you see it at a first team level, don't you? When, like, you just mentioned some of the different clubs that he was at there and the differences in the circumstance of those individual clubs. And I think that's a big one for me, is that as a practitioner, okay, you don't have the facilities of X, Y, and Z, those clubs, but what can you do? And also, again, it ties into the experiences that you're creating for players. I still speak to players now that when we had essentially a pitch to do an S&C session, no equipment whatsoever, and they probably took a hell of a lot from that at that time, but they also relate on it as like a fond memory.
Yeah.
And there's still plenty that you can do in those circumstances. I spoke to, you mentioned Dave before, Dave Caroline tells a brilliant story about, I think he might have even mentioned it on the first podcast that we ever did, was one of the clubs he was at. They gave him he talked about this. I can't remember if you were there or not at the conference, about getting a work car.
Oh,
When they gave him the car, it was a van and it was full of kit in the back, and that was essentially the gym, and that's what he had to work with. But that, if you look at it from a player's perspective, we don't need a lot to develop players. The fancy facilities and stuff that are going to be popping up in places like down there soon and all the rest of it, they're great. But as a coach, you can use very little and you can still get some really quality work done. And I know that, and this ties in again with what Nick was saying about celebrating some of these programs. There's some brilliant work being done with academy players with minimal equipment, minimal sort of financial backing and all the rest of it. And it's creating brilliant players. Like we talked there about Man United. There's a lot of players coming through the academy at Man United, coming up through local clubs in the area, that are having to fundraise and do all the things that these local amateur clubs have to do to stay alive, essentially. And it's creating these players that are going on to play international football and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I think that's so important. A massive takeaway for me on that one in terms of that environment.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right, like, just talking on demographics and things, and like you realising it. I think as a practitioner as well, I've moved around a fair bit. I've worked at a few clubs, so you kind of go, oh yeah, I know this worked, and like you say, you automatically start a new role, and you think, well, why don't I try and apply that? But I can just think of two clubs off the top of my head. Notts County, League Two at the time, we're very proud of their heritage, oldest football league club in the world before they dropped out of the football league, unfortunately. But demographic was inner city Nottingham kids, who technically the best players in the city would probably go to Forest. But I remember the crop of players that we had in the academy when I was there, that most of them had run through brick walls for you, and you really, like you say, some of the best development gets done with them because of their attitude and what they want to do. And some of them are doing really, really well now. Some of the lads we had there, they're playing championship international football now. And you kind of go in, fair play. You didn't need the fancy facilities. Notts County, we literally had Meadow Lane, didn't have a training ground at the time. And the gym was 2 old squash courts converted, and I think anyone, if you took a Cat 1 player who'd only ever spent, all his time in a Cat 1 and dropped him in that facility, you'd look at it and go, a few raised eyebrows and be like, what is this? But the reality is you can still get results, but that's because who you've got, and that comes back to that relationship thing we talked about earlier. You know those players, you know where they're coming from, you know their story, and if you are again, it ties in quite nicely. If you are just hiding behind a spreadsheet and you're doing, let's say your daily wellness is on the PMA or whatever system you want to use, and you go, oh, okay, they're this, that, the other, and you don't speak to them, and then you go in and get in the gym. Or you can do that, but then you can go speak to them, actually have a bit of time with them, a bit of a natter, and find out a bit about them, what makes them tick. That relationship builds, and then you know a bit more about them. You know about the demographic, you know about the club's history, you know about what their drives them. The development's just always going to be better in that scenario. Yeah. So when we're talking about a club's heritage and history and where it is in the country and everything that goes into it, it really is important stuff. But like I say, that stuff that we were doing there might not apply to a Bournemouth, or a Southampton or wherever else, because it's a different demographic. Leafy green down on the south coast, it's nice. You've got different types of player, but technically we've got some outstanding players down here. But I know that there's some of the players who we had at Notts County at the time that would run over some of the lads down here just through hard will and desire alone. And technically whether it's good, no. But I just know their attitude and things from where they came from and their background made them that way. So I think that was really important. And I think that's what, both Nick, Per, and Jonathan, to be fair, they were talking about buying into the club you're at, because as the practitioner, it does matter. You've got to, like you say, culture is a big part of football. You have got to embrace it. The word does get thrown around a lot, and it is a bit of a bugbear of mine that you're like, oh, this is our culture. We have these big 3 key phrases on, a badge or on the wall, and we all try and stick to these. But then, you scratch beneath the surface, and it's still the same. We're just trying to produce players. We're just trying to get the players through. We don't really care and all that sort of stuff. So some clubs do it really well, and they do abide by their culture. Some clubs, it is a bit more of just a name on the wall, as far as I can tell. So, or a word on the wall, rather. So, yeah, it really, like, as you can see, it provoked loads of thoughts, just kind of driving away. And when you think of the grand picture and the big picture of academy football, there's a lot more that goes into it than just we're trying to get a talented footballer and turn them into a professional. There's a lot more that goes into that.
I think a really interesting point you brought up before was the whole looking more from the practitioner side now is the wage and I suppose the career path that I was going to say that is created. I don't think it necessarily is created, because I think, like you mentioned before, the path that's a lot of people have trodden already is to go from academy and end up in first team. So what do you think needs to happen in terms of encouraging? So, because we could probably name a large number of elite level academy developers that are either still at academy or majority have probably gone up to first team. And obviously now that slot has been lost at the academy, and their attributes, their skills have been taken away from the academy. So what do you think needs to happen with that?
This will be an hour debate in itself, probably more, to be honest. But you almost need to just restructure a little bit, because inevitably, if you started an academy now with no one in place, and you had a brand new academy, and it was where we're trying to fill these roles, because the pressure is the first team, naturally, that's where the money comes in from the club and how the first team perform. That's where the majority of the wages are going to go. That's where the majority of the practitioners are going to go. And that's where inevitably people are going to want to work, because wages are higher, and work-life balance and things like that, and etc. Might be slightly better. The problem would be, it takes a brave club to go, actually, we're going to invest in our youth development. And there were some good stories on the day of how clubs were doing it. Forgotten right now. I think it was when Nick was talking about Watford, and budgets were being slashed, and they were very close to administration.
Yeah, that's right.
And they said, no, we're not going to cut the youth development budget, because that is a huge part of this club, and actually we rely on players coming through from our academy. And I think that is where, if you are, ultimately it's a results driven business, we know that, and if you are not producing players, budgets get taken away. But to try and redress it overnight, it's a decade plus long process to try and get those practitioners in there, and keep them there, because like you say, the wage is going to be higher. Inevitably, family pressures and what we have going on in our own lives as practitioners is going to dictate what we do in our career. Exactly what happened to me. I loved working in academies. I love working in academies. That's why I took the Bournemouth job as well, because everything they're doing on buyer banding and growth and maturation, I absolutely buy into it. I love it, and I really wanted to be involved in that kind of really in-depth youth development role. But a lot of it was evening works. My missus had moved down for us, so my situation at home meant I wasn't seeing my missus, as we touched on the previous podcast. I don't need to go over it all again, but I needed to make a change in order to be for my family. So people have their external pressures outside of football, and obviously that's then going to dictate what they want to achieve. But if clubs could be brave and say, actually, we see your value as a youth developer, let's just call it that, how can we work to keep you in that role? Because we see the impact you have on young players and how amazing you are at developing them and kind of bringing the best out of them. That's when clubs will really start to thrive, and I think you'll see better products in the long run, long term. But it's there's so many factors that go into it. Like you say, context gets applied, and it's very, very different. But I think it was nice going back to the Training Going Guru kind of conference and the speeches that were going on, that when the best youth developers were the ones who kept the context in mind, and like I say, kept demographics in mind or kept the experiences in mind. And when they kind of reflect on their process as an academy as a whole, they appreciate that not every player is going to make it through the system. They appreciate that these players who are being developed as young people are developing themselves outside of football as well. And so the whole thing just snowballs, because the more essentially alumni you get that come through an academy, even if they don't go on to the first team, they go on to a different club or they drop out of football, the better the buzz is around that academy, the more people who praise it, the more people who say, what an amazing academy. The club then realizes, we've got a really good academy. We want to invest in the academy. People want to then work in the academy, and then it just snowballs, and then you get the best youth developers in that academy. But if your process isn't right to develop good footballers, good human beings as well in the academy in the first place, and you just try and literally trying to thread the needle from miles away in terms of that percentage of getting players through into the first team environment, and that's all you're focused on, and all these other people are dropping off by the wayside, and turn out they don't actually like, they reflect on their academy journey as a player, and they go, I didn't enjoy that anymore because it just felt like I was in the meat grinder sort of thing. You either get a reputation or it just becomes any other academy in the country, and that's where, it's a huge topic. We spoke about it. There's been documentaries made on it. The Crystal Palace one highlighted it. The Race to the Bottom documentary a few years ago now highlighted it really well. And if people haven't heard of that, Google it. It was really, really good. I remember speaking about that a while ago. But academies have a brilliant opportunities to properly develop young people, not just footballers. And it takes brave clubs to then invest in those coaches and practitioners to help do that. But like I say, it's a snowball process. Once you start it essentially funds itself. You can look at some of the models of the best academies in the country, and they're self-funding. Chelsea's always a great example. They sell so many talented players on that money just comes back into the academy. It just gets better and better and better and better and better. So when you are starting to look at budgets, well, actually, if you have a really successful producing academy, it becomes self-funding, and it can almost then just grow and become better and better and better. So I've tried to condense a lot there, but there's still way more you could go, way more rabbit holes you could jump down. So that's an insight into my mind there, right? So apologies.
Well, that's what we're doing on this. These are therapy sessions, so we're just getting everything out there. No, I think that's really interesting. I think that in terms of opportunities as well, I think it was Nick that mentioned getting players through to first team. The opportunities then come for a number of different reasons. Either the team is underperforming, and you'll put an academy player in. I think some of the other circumstances that he mentioned were maybe towards the end of the season where it doesn't really mean anything. And what was the other ones that you said? Can you remember?
Injury crisis as well.
Injury crisis.
Typically, like lack of left backs in the first team, drag the 23s player up and just hope he does all right, and then he does really well, and then lo and behold, he starts the next 5 games. Yeah, that sort of thing. So.
Then the other one, I suppose, which you've seen at a lot of clubs, is financial issues. So kind of what you mentioned before about what you were talking about with Watford. But if a club's in financial strain and you've got to sell off a lot of first team players, then academy players could get the chance. And I suppose the only reason I raised that is because that, again, for me, underlines the importance of having these developers at that level so players are ready. They're ready to step up. Because if you do have a circumstance where first, say it's the financial one and a lot of first team players have gone, then your academy players are there, but they're not ready.
Yeah.
Then, well, one, it's probably putting them at a risk to a certain point, whether that's reputation or whether that's actually physically as well, because they're not ready to play. Or they're just not going to thrive. They're not going to take advantage of that scenario and that position that they've been put in. So I think that just underlines it again. And I agree with you. I'd love to see clubs be brave on it, to say, like, we have got this absolutely elite level developer in our academy. We're going to reward them financially. To the person, to the practitioner, and then we're going to give them, not give them the world, because we touched on that before. Like, you can develop you don't have to have everything under the sun to develop the players, but they need to back them. And I think that will be really refreshing and nice to see for clubs to do that. And not every club's going to do it, obviously. It's a results-based business, we know that. But to see some more clubs do that, I think will be really refreshing.
Yeah, 100%. And you can go wider than that as well, in terms of just investing in the staff, because we know, and I'm sure hopefully there's a lot of people listening to this who are based in an academy, maybe working in the foundation phase or the youth development phase, or have done in the past, or if they're a Cat 3 academy, they are the only person for the academy as a sports scientist or strength and conditioning coach, sometimes physio, sometimes sports therapist, analyst, you name it. And essentially you're spread way too thin. So, if you're responsible for, which I have been, for 120, 130 odd players in an academy and their physical development, and you've got a couple of nights a week to try and do it whilst having done, the professional development phase all through the day as well, you're not going to give those players the best opportunities. You're not going to give them your time. When you might have to bundle a squad into the gym for half an hour, which you've tried to wrestle off the coaches to try and get, an age group some gym time, and it's just you in there and potentially maybe a placement student or a volunteer who's coming in and shadowing for experience. But naturally, that's not good. That's not best practice. We know that's not best practice. And the funny thing is, if we played exactly what we've said to directors of football clubs, CEOs, financial managers, that say, yeah, we understand that. They might not. Hopefully they do understand it. They would say, oh, I didn't realise, but unfortunately, budgets are budgets. But we've all been in those situations where there is sometimes silly money that gets thrown at things. But again, if you can make the case for, well, actually, if we can provide better provision for your academy, you're going to get better provision for your first team, etc. And like I say, it snowballs. So I think just the wider context of like value placed upon academies. Again, it's one of those where the youngest age groups typically sometimes don't have the value. I've been at clubs, and I won't name them, but you pull your hair out because the under 16s, are traveling 4.5 hours on a cramped little minibus to a national tournament, whereas the under 21s are on the first team bus to an away fixture 30 minutes down the road. And it's like, yeah, I get that they're more what's classed the business end of the academy, but just imagine if you put a team of, let's say, under 13s in the first team bus, and what that would do for them and that experience and that, that thing. And again, it comes down to budgets. That's what football, unfortunately, is driven by a lot of the time. But that's where, like you say, I'd just love to see some clubs be brave and go, actually, we're going to do things differently. You know, and I hate the fact that the phrase "we've always done it this way" does get said still a lot in football, certainly in the men's game. You know, it's like, well, why would we give the under-14s, you know, a proper coach to travel to a national tournament? Why? Because they've never done that before. Oh, okay. Well, if you've never done that before, then let's scrap everything else we're doing. You know, let's not be innovative. Great. You know, it's those sorts of mindsets which need to change, in my opinion. And hopefully we'll then see some progress. I mean, and then this is what Nick finished on, didn't he? He said there's doom and gloom about academies of all these reasons we've just said, but there is a lot of good work still going on. So we need to acknowledge that there's still problems and things that need to be fixed, but we are still doing a lot of good work as a cohort across the country. But there's, in my opinion, still loads more that could be done, 100%.
Yeah, definitely. Let's wrap things up with obviously the highlight of the whole conference was the final round table for obvious reasons. But what were your thoughts? Because we spoke about this on the last episode that we did with just yourself and I when we were talking about the future athlete. We touched on it a little bit, but that was obviously before Tony, Dave, and Tom gave their perspective at the conference. So what were some of your takeaways from what they were saying?
Oh, so much. Yeah, you can listen to them guys talk for a long time, but they're very level-headed because, you know, they've been there and done that. You know, they've seen the evolution of sports science from the early 2000s, and when it changed, and they were talking about, you know, players used to drink. Like, there was a drinking culture in football, and they were there when that was a thing. So to where it is now, you know, is a huge change. I think, they were acknowledging that, similar to what we said, really. I think that was a good to hear them say it. You know, when people, you know, of that ilk speak, you listen. So when they were saying that, yes, we're going to have data, yes, we're going to have AI, yes, we're going to have people who are far better on spreadsheets than myself and those guys said that, you know, they were. But this is still a relationships game, and it's still about forming those relationships with players, forming those relationships with the key stakeholders, the managers, the coaches, the analysts, and all that sort of stuff. So that was on that side of things. Also, that's great. Yeah, brilliant. You know, that's exactly what you want to hear almost, that those soft skills, as we always talk about on the podcast, and over and over and over again, soft skills are so important. So that was great to hear. And I think the other takeaway as well, that and we've had long discussions off forums like this and stuff in terms of players working privately. I thought that was really interesting to hear as well, because you know, these guys have seen first team players go off and work with their own individuals. We know players that do it. We've worked with players ourselves. So it's like, it does need regulating, like they were saying. You know, it does need regulating, but that's where, again, clubs can be brave. And if they know who their players are going to, and they know he's decent, we've worked with him, I know him, he spoke to us, he's really open with his communication, we're all aligned, everything's on point, then don't fear it as much. Because that's what I was when they first started talking about it, they were saying like, it almost sounded like it was a bad thing, players going and working with their own private coaches and technical coaches, I mean that, as well as physical performance coaches, as well as analysts as well. People do have their own private analysts now, chefs, all sorts, you know, going on. And they kind of started to like give the doom and gloom a little, like, that's a really bad thing, it's a really bad thing. And then they developed the conversation to more, actually, it could be a bad thing if it was just any Tom, Dick and Harry that they're going to. But once we know who they're going to and the people that they are going to, these, you know, private coaches are really open with their lines of communication, and we can regulate it, and we can speak to them and go and have a sit down with them and just be like, this is what we're doing, and we know this player needs a little bit more, are you okay to cover that, whatever it might be. Then it goes, this is actually a healthy evolution for the industry. Because again, we can't always give 100% focus. That's the beauty of working one-to-one with the player. You can give them 100% focus, but when you've got a squad of 25, 30 players that you need to give your focus to, and you've only got 4 or 5 members of staff, maybe in the first team if you're lucky, and naturally you're having to kind of, you know, desaturate your attention to them all. So that's why players want the best they can get. You know, their performance is their career on the line at the end of the day. So if they think, actually, I could be 1, 2, 3% fitter, or 1, 2, 3% stronger or faster, whatever it might be, I might go to somebody that might be able to help me with that. And that evolution of that relationship between club and private practitioner, it was really interesting to hear their views on that, so that you can see that there is actually, they think there is a future there, which is good. So,
well, I think it's obvious that there is going to be, isn't there? Like that is going to be the way going forward. Like players are going to use it, but I fully agree. I know Tony spoke about this before. He spoke about the insurance side, and I'd say now anyone listening that's working with players that doesn't have the right cover and protection, you're absolutely daft, because I don't know why you wouldn't. Like you should be looking into that side of things, because you're dealing with players that are their assets to clubs, and you should be respectful to the club. You should be respectful to the player to have the right level of cover. So I know that's something that he's mentioned before, and I find it astounding that people wouldn't have that in place. But if they don't, it's crazy, really.
Yeah.
But then the other side is kind of what you touched on. I think Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Tom was the one who referenced this in terms of having someone that you can refer to, so someone that you trust. Because I fully get it. Like if you're at a club and your player's working with someone you don't know, there might be a personal trainer, and they don't fully understand how the week works for a player. They're literally just dealing with that person in front of them. Again, removing all context. They don't know when the games are. They don't understand what the program is that is running at the club, injury history, all the things that go into designing a program. If that was the case, that's very, very different to going and seeing someone private who is in communication with the club. They've worked at a club, so they understand how the week goes in the build up to a game. They understand recovery. They then can focus on the individual, like you've just mentioned before. I just think those two things are very different. So the more we can get onto that second example, where you've got these people that are qualified, that are doing good jobs with players, that are transparent and communicating in the right way, that for me is how it should move going forward. And I think that's what they were kind of getting at in that conversation.
Definitely.
So I think those two things are really important. If you're listening to this and you work with players in the private setting and you don't have the right cover and stuff, look into it right now, because you shouldn't be doing that. That shouldn't be happening. These players need to be protected. And essentially, like I said, you're working with an asset of a football club. And then the other side of things, if you are someone that is working with players and you don't understand what they do at a club, you should probably upskill yourself and get to know that pretty quickly, because it's very important. So I think on that conversation, there's some of the key things that I took away from it. And then, like you said, the club's having someone to refer out to. I think that's probably going to be a pattern that we see a little bit more, because then the trust is then built.
Yeah, I agree. And we are seeing, big names set up consultancy and be private, and if you can trust who it is, you're gonna try and steer your players if you're at a club that way. So it makes sense.
100%. Well, mate, we've done over 40 minutes of trash talk. Well, that could be winning.
That's not a bad one, actually.
We are going to put some of these examples that we've been talking about before, and we want to get a name for this section of the podcast. We're going to keep these going. We're going to put them in every now and again, like we said, reflecting on current events or trends and stuff that are going around in the industry. Hopefully it's relatively easy listening, and it's but the guests will still be coming. We're still going to keep them coming every week. These are just going to be bonus episodes with a nice fancy title hopefully soon. So Jordan, thank you for coming on again, mate.
No worries.
And
I'm sorry that I bored a few people as well, I'm sure. But no, thank you for listening if you have stuck with us.
Exactly. But you can use this before you go to sleep, just to send you off. And then, that's it.
Put the kids to sleep, put the dog to sleep, whatever you need. There you go.
Perfect. But we'll jump on another one soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cheers, mate.
See ya.